Rook's Rest falls no more. Summary: Wherein the Rogue Prince's impatience saves a life and changes fates. Written and read by Neria. Rook's Rest. Here he was, amassing an army at Harrenhal, baiting his fool nephews for a rash attack, and yet Kristen Cole had gone and besieged fucking Rook's Rest, doubtless hoping to spring a trap of his own. A smile curled his lips. Hope was all he could, for Daemon was no fool to fall into such an obvious trap, and all the other dragons were to keep out of the fighting, for now. He shook his head and tore his gaze away from the map, only for it to be drawn back to it again and again. Rook's Rest. It was tempting. It was so very, very tempting. He had meant to focus the usurper's attention on the Riverlands and force him into a thoughtless attack, yet here he was, weeks later, having taken Harrenhal and Stonehenge, having rooted the Greens out of the Riverlands altogether. Still waiting, the army long gathered. Fucking Rook's Rest. There was no doubt in his mind a trap awaited him there. A trap meant for a dragon. Sunfire was no match for any of their grown dragons, certainly not for either Caraxes or Meleys, and the usurper was too valuable to risk besides. No, they could not hope to entrap anyone with Sunfire. It would have to be Vhagar. Vhagar was a formidable dragon on her own, but her rider was a green boy, unblooded. He would prove no challenge to him, he was sure. Taking Vhagar out of the fight would be a boon. Taking the Kinslayer out... He was tempted. Very, very tempted. He was not a fool, he reminded himself. It was a trap. A trap meant for him. This time, when his eyes traveled to Rook's Rest, they snagged on Dragonstone. They would expect Caraxes. They would not expect more. He could take Rhaenys. Meleys was a quick, formidable dragon on her own. With Caraxes, little could hope to stand against them. If he could convince Rhaenyra to take Syrax as well, if she was recovered enough, they could end the Green Army then and there, and nothing would be able to stop them. Vermax, if she was not. Surely Jacaerys must have returned by now. A dragon was laying in wait for him at Rook's Rest. He was sure of it. Vhagar. That was an opportunity which could not be missed. Not even at the price of their army here at Harrenhal should the usurper decide to pay a visit while he was gone. But he would not. Sunfire was no match for Caraxes. Any fool knew that, and the usurper would not risk his own skin. Not when he could not be sure Daemon was truly gone from the Riverlands. He would have to be quick about it, lest he returns to find his army turned to ash, but he could do it. He was certain of it. Rook's Rest. The fool that he was, he had taken the shortest path to Dragonstone. It had seemed a sound strategy to fly with all haste, to fly unnoticed high above the clouds, to fly in a straight fucking line. It had seemed a sound strategy until Vhagar's roar split the sky and he dove below the clouds, barreling madly toward the ground in a descent he knew Vhagar could never hope to pull out of in time. There was no one chasing him, he came to realize as instinct was replaced by reason as his eyes settled on the image in the distance. 3 dragons, one of them unmistakably Vhagar. One of them, unmistakably Meleys. His heart sank. It was a trap, he had known. It was a trap for him, he had believed. But it was Rhaenys that had come, snatching up the bait. His focus sharpened, his mind set. He had meant to go to Dragonstone to gather dragons and plan an attack. Here he was, dragons in place, the trap snapping shut. Admittedly, it was not the trap he had expected, but there was only one dragon this would ever have hope of working with, and here she was. A cold smile stretched on his face, and he patted Caraxes, urging him onward toward the dragons about to clash. Shall we play a game? The bloodworm, utterly attuned to his rider as ever, let out a mocking trill as he closed the distance. Vagar knew that call. Vagar had hated that call longer than Daemon had been alive. She knew the game now, she would be sure. Meleys heading for her from one direction, Caraxes from the opposite. He could only imagine what went through the Kinslayer's head as his mount suddenly rolled in her dive toward Meleys and then turned it into an ascent. Sunfire, following the heavier dragon in the dive, was left to struggle to get out of the way, wings flapping uselessly in the confusion. Daemon let out a laugh as the smaller dragon stabilized, only to be swept away by Vagar's heavy tail as it snapped about and Sunfire was thrown across the sky. The usurper could wait, he decided. It was the Kinslayer that had to be dealt with first. He bade Caraxes to rise after the she-dragon, and the dragon let out another aggravating trill, and Meleys followed in his wake, wise to the game as well. The Kinslayer's panicked shouts could be heard even over the rushing of air, and a cruel smile curled Daemon's lips. It would serve him little. What they were about now was a habit half-century in the making, and the boy was greener than grass. The dragons had played catch countless times over the decades under various riders, seeking to have some fun while honing their skills. Once upon a time, Vagar, the oldest of the three dragons, had been the swiftest and therefore the one designated to be caught, to better train the young ones. The times had changed, and Meleys had taken the lead as the swiftest of them, and then Caraxes had surpassed the aging giant too, but the role had never shifted away. Vagar had always been the prey, and so when the bloodworm had announced the start of the chase, she had taken off without a thought spared for her rider. Her riders were well used to the game, after all. Had been used to the game. The she-dragon had gained height to avoid her pursuers coming from below, but once she judged the distance safe enough, she plummeted to the ground once more, descending to fly low over the ground, heedless of the ants scattering about. Vagar was slower, had been slower for decades. There had been little challenge in merely outpacing her, in merely catching her. It was her belly a dragon had to rub against to win, and it was her belly she knew to protect. Lone arrows flew up to meet them on occasion, but he ignored them. It was dragons that danced now, and there would be no distractions. Rhaenys was on Vagar's other side, slightly ahead of him, and when she swooped down and over her prey's back, the she-dragon pressed ever lower, and the bloodworm and Meleys traded position. They chased the massive dragon away from her army, trading places and feigning attacks. The boy was no longer screaming, and the smile curling Daemon's lips was very, very satisfied. On the next pass, he ordered Caraxes to bathe Vagar's back and her rider in fire. The ancient dragoness roared in pain and fury and threshed and fell to the ground with thunderous crash as the bloodworm and the Red Queen flew for the clouds, turning back to face the army they had left behind, largely untouched. My prince, it was our belief that you were to remain in the Riverlands to gather our forces and await our enemies there. Daemon's lips stretched into a slow grin as he inclined his head. That was my intention. But an opportunity presented itself, too tempting to pass, and I could not resist. I have a gift for you, my queen. Rhaenyra's face was grey, still grieving, still not recovered from the blows dealt to her so swiftly, one after another, and yet the imperiously inquisitive brow that rose at his words gave him hope. And her tone was deliciously skeptical. A gift. A gift? A gift for me has you leaving Harrenhal unprotected? His cheeks were starting to hurt from his grin. There is little need for more protection. The danger to Harrenhal is past. He took the sapphire he had been fidgeting with from behind his back and slid it towards her across the painted table. When Rhaenyra's fingers reached out to caress the stone and her bewildered eyes met his in a silent question, his expression turned somber, and he spoke out with a grave nod toward the stone. An eye for an eye. A son for a son. All air seemingly left the room as the queen raised a trembling hand to her lips. Aemond. That he confirmed in a clear and firm voice. How? Rook's Rest. Cole had Vagar and Sunfire lay in wait. Caraxes and Meleys proved superior. Rhaenyra's eyes sharpened immediately, and her next question was snapped out. The usurper? He shook his head, and her eyes filled with disappointment. Missing, but Sunfire captured and injured. Sunfire had not even truly participated in the fight. The final strikes suffered through Vagar's carelessness had the dragon nurse a wing at an awkward angle, and though his rider had been nowhere to be found, he had no doubt he would be eventually. He was of little consequence with his dragon so hurt and chained down tightly besides. Her brows furrowed, and she nodded thoughtfully. Good. Good. What of Vagar? Grieving, but otherwise well. Rhaenys guided her to Driftmark. A true smile appeared on her face for the first time since this nightmare had begun. Very good. Daemon smiled at her approvingly. Indeed, my queen, it is my belief that this might be the time to take Lord Saltigar's advice, fly our dragons to King's Landing. Her smile widened, and she rolled her eyes at his dick. We will fly there once you have brought our army down south from Harrenhal and through the gates of the city. His grin was face-splitting as he bowed respectfully. As my queen commands. It was good to see her smile. It was good to have given her a reason to. The end. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next one. Bye!